start having discussion. We had a 30-minute discussion. I had a 30-minute discussion. Thank you, Bryon. And I got productive information out of that. Put it to work later that day. So I've really run with that to a large degree, utilizing AI and teaching about my life. And immediately said, I have to get Bryon to come and talk to me. This is valuable information. They'll all be more productive after listening to Bryon here. And so if Bryon comes to us, was at home away for a decade, founder of data.world, co-founder of data.world, awesome credentials and expertise, but it's really about how you can apply this to your own life. That's really what I want. So with that introduction to Bryon, please take the stage.
Awesome, thank you. Do I need the mic, or can you all hear me? It's pretty small. Oh, okay. I thought the lapel was for the people online. The lapel will work for online. Can people online hear? All right, I'm gonna set the mic down there. I don't think I need it. Awesome. Thank you, Gary. Yeah, this somebody was asking me at the beginning of this. Is like, is this talk something you do for work, or why do you do this? And I'll tell the story real quick about how this talk came about. I was on a panel at Austin Forum. This was not the talk that Gary came to. I was on a panel, and we're talking about generative AI. And there's like 400 people at this panel at the Austin Library, and we're talking about generative AI. And I made a couple comments about, well, it's like when you do this with ChatGPT or do this. And I looked at these like 400 people, and I just saw so many blank stares coming back. And so I actually stopped the panel for a second. I was like, wait, how many of you have actually used ChatGPT? And maybe 20–25% of the people there raised their hand. And like, how many have used it more than once or twice, just to play with it? Most of the hands went down. How many of you use this weekly, daily, regular as a part of your job? Almost nobody, like 3 or 4 people out of 400. And that really struck me, because I'm like, I realized I live in this bubble where I'm like, how is everyone not using this technology all the time? And so that was the thing that kind of spurred me to create this talk. So that night I kind of sat down and had a drink with Jay Boisseau, the guy who runs Austin Forum. I was like, we need to do another session. And that was the talk that Gary came to 6 months ago. So I've given this a couple times since then. So really, I mean, my motivation on this is just, I think this stuff is really important. I think I started realizing that, like, kind of outside of maybe the tech bubbles that some of us live in, people didn't really understand what this is all about, what's going on. So this is a little bit kind of maybe just a quick, rapid history lesson of like what's happened in the last couple of years and like why this is so substantial. And then a whole lot of like, here's how I recommend you kind of dig in and understand this. Because I think the way to dig into this technology isn't to hear about it from people like me or read about it. It's to actually get out there and dig into it yourself. So, I just, this, there is a really rapidly coming deepening of like the separation of like haves and have-nots that's going to take all the existing gaps and really widen them. And it's going to be about who's actually engaged in using AI for strategic leverage and who's not. And like, it's not yet too late to do that. Like right now is this really, really interesting moment. There's a really interesting couple years right now where I think if you want to actually understand AI, understand how to use it, get any sort of leverage advantage out of it, it's right now. And it's not like if you wait, you're not going to get to use AI. Everyone's going to get to use it. It is going to be completely packaged up and force-fed to you by large organizations. The problem's going to be solved. Right now is actually a moment where nobody's really a deep expert in it except the handful of deep experts who are building it. Everybody is figuring this out on the fly, but that's rapidly changing. In the last couple of years, the amount of investment that's gone into this is really the thing that everyone is investing in, and the story's getting written, and right now is not the time to kind of sit it out and wait. So I want to talk about like this timeline. I think is really important to understand, because I think people, if you haven't been kind of really in this world, this timeline isn't obvious to people. What happened over this period from 2017 to 2023? The transformer is kind of the basic architecture of the kind of deep learning model that we're all talking about now with things like ChatGPT, generative AI. And what happened was a bunch of researchers at Google put out a paper talking about this new architecture that was a very promising way where they were getting really discontinuously good results with doing these deep learning models on training them on large corpuses of human language. What happened from 2017 to 2022 is, and during this period of time, most of you were probably not paying any attention whatsoever to what was going on in generative AI. Almost nobody was. If you weren't deeply in this space, maybe some of you, were aware of things like the BERT models, things like that. There was some, you could be aware of this if you were kind of deeply in that space, but most of this research was happening in research laboratories at universities, huge corporations, people figuring this out, but none of this had been productized. None of this was really being commercialized. This was kind of deep fundamental research. What happened from 2017 to 2022 is we saw this blue curve in terms of improvement in the ability of these models to effectively synthesize human language and communicate in this very conversational way that we've all kind of become accustomed to with large language models. That blue curve represents a, like it says there, over 15,000x increase in that 3 years. This little dashed line is what you would expect if we were kind of following the normal Moore's law curve. And right, this is all on a log scale over here, right? So don't imagine, these aren't straight lines. In fact, these are very much curving up and to the right, up into the right graphs. If you were to plot them on a linear curve, it would be so much that it would basically just be a straight line up. This is what you would expect if we followed the normal Moore's law that's driven all the innovation in computing and the internet and the web and all of those things. This is the degree of magnitude that we saw in this area of research. So this is just in a period of 5 years, we went from the Stone Ages to the deep future in terms of what happened with this technology. And then what happened at the end of that timeline, which is kind of the start of most everyone's awareness of this, is right at the end of 2022, OpenAI took their version of all that research, packaged it up into a really friendly thing called ChatGPT, and they put it out on the internet and said, here, anyone in the world who wants to use this, come in and use it. And they did this for a couple of reasons. One reason is they just wanted to get it out there and get this into the zeitgeist and actually start the arms race we're all in now of let's go get this out there so that it becomes apparent to the world what's going on and we start getting these billions and billions of dollars of investment. Two, these things are basically pattern matching machines, right? These things, up to that point, if you were using this generative AI, what it was really good at was completing a thought, right? You could basically type the first few paragraphs of a story and it would pretty reasonably generate the rest of the story. You could type the first few lines of an email and it would pretty reasonably. The kind of interactions we expect now, where you ask it questions, you interact with it in a conversational way, it wasn't very good at that. And the reason it wasn't very good at that is it didn't have a lot of training data to build that on. So by putting it out there in the world, they wanted to get a couple billion people to come in and have a couple 100 billion conversations with it and take all that data and go back and retrain this model to say, hey, this is what successful interactions look like. These are what good interactions look like. Do more like this. That's how this technology works, right? It seems kind of very magical. It seems very much like it's reasoning and thinking and interacting like a human. But what it is in fact doing is doing really complex statistical prediction of, I know what good conversations look like, and so I'm going to fill in the next word in this sentence over and over again, building toward what looks like a successful interaction. Another log curve here that just kind of shows how much uptake this got. These curves are all basically how long did it take in days for each of these very viral technologies to get first to 1 million users and then to 100 million users. So you see things like Netflix and Twitter and these things. Instagram kind of famously had a very fast rise to prominence and a very fast kind of multi-billion-dollar exit based on that. And excuse me. And ChatGPT on this chart, again, looks like a line straight up. They were basically within a couple of weeks to over 100 billion users. It was by far the fastest growing consumer access application that had ever been released. They released it, and within a few weeks, 100 million people had logged in and had interactions. So we talked about that timeline of kind of deep research leading up to when this came out. Over the course of the rest of 2023, I found this timeline of kind of some of the highlights. What happened over 2023 was we saw a few of the open source models. So, OpenAI's model, despite open in their name, is actually a closed proprietary commercial thing. A company owns it. They run it behind their firewalls. They don't let you run your own version of it or see what's going on. It's simply you access it and it gives you back answers. The Llama models and actually the Mistral models are models that are put out by other companies. These are completely open source. You can go, if you want, download the source code to execute these models. They are also open weights, meaning like the numbers, the actual statistical model that is the intelligence that they've trained it on, that's also open. So you can actually go grab these things and run them on your own servers. The servers are very expensive to run. They're these kind of very expensive GPU servers you've heard about. If you want to go train your own version of the model, you can also do that. It costs about $10 million to do a training run, to basically take a corpus of data and push it through. You have to be able to go run that on, you can't run that on one or two of these expensive GPU machines. You need about 1,000 of them running nonstop for several weeks to do these training models. So these things are open. It's incredibly computationally expensive. It's why these kind of big companies are the ones who tend to run these models and run them as a service, because they can afford to go invest tens, hundreds of millions of dollars training and running these models, and then sell as a service, basically, per use kind of access to them and make their money back that way. So this was kind of like, over the course of 2023, we saw a couple of additional kind of big leaps, like the, GPT-4 versus GPT-3, which was the first version, orders of magnitude smarter, right? Where GPT-3 was very interesting, it could do some cute stuff. GPT-4 starts actually getting to the point where we can measurably say this is as intelligent and effective as humans at a great number of tasks. And it's one thing to kind of anecdotally interact with it and experience that for yourself. A lot of people are doing a lot of scientific research on this, where they're actually developing benchmarks of, let's go out and actually put tasks in front of a few hundred people, put those same tasks in front of these models, compare the results, give an apples to apples comparison. So we're starting to be able to actually build a science around how much better are these things at an equivalent person at doing the same kind of task. I found this timeline for what happened during 2024, and with the amount of investment going into this, it just really keeps kind of accelerating. I'll highlight a couple types of things on here. One is just we keep getting more and better and smarter general purpose models. We see Anthropic's Claude models have gotten really good at a number of things. GPT 4.0 and 4.0 mini, OpenAI continues to innovate. The Llama models continue to get better. Each one of these generations, these models are just significantly more intelligent than the previous. The other thing you start seeing is some of these really well-articulated agentic tools that sit on top of the models and do specific tasks. A couple things that we're highlighting on here. So Devon AI actually is kind of obsolete at this point. That was at the beginning of 2024, so it's over a year old. It's definitely archaic at this point, but it was kind of the first real coding tool where it was actually meant to be, this is a software developer in a box. You go give it a task and say, go produce this piece of software and give it back to me as though you're a human engineer. And it was able to do that to some degree. I'm going to show you in my presentation a more modern version of that tool that's actually at this point, quite effective, and really, I know a number of companies who are effectively building all of their software this way now. Doesn't mean you don't need software engineers. It means you need a lot less of them, and it means their job is a lot different than it used to be a year ago. Sora is ChatGPT's video model. I'm going to show you some of the things I've done with that later, which will be funny. And then there's a tool, there's so many of these things to experiment. There's a tool called Suno. This one is fun to just kind of just to get a picture of what kinds of things you can train these models to do. It's an AI song generator, and it's not a song generator in that it generates a cute little tune. It's a song generator in the sense that you can basically give it a topic, a lyric, a concept, something you want to write a song about, and then give it a style of music or a musician you like, and it will go off and think for about 30 or 60 seconds, and it'll come back with a 2 or 3 minute track that sounds like it was recorded in a music studio with all the instrumentation, whatever you've kind of directed it to do. I encourage you, just try these tools out. Install it on your phone and try it out. It seems like it's hard to kind of it's hard to kind of talk about the experience. You have to kind of try some of these things out. But these are some of the things I think will just start to open your mind to what is possible. So I like this graph to think about just kind of what's happened in the last couple of years. And I talked up front about how we're in this really interesting window of time. And I think that really, the way I think about that really interesting window of time is if you think about things that escalate on an exponential curve, right? This is the shape of an exponential curve. Things curve up and to the right. It means as time goes on, everything is accelerating and moves more quickly. And I like a bunch of things about this chart. There's something I don't like, which I'll edit out in a minute. But if you look at this, it kind of talks about going back to some of the earliest experiments with this in 2012. This kind of pretends that nothing happened prior to 2012. But again, it's the nature of exponential curves like it's kind of almost implying like compared to what's happened in the last couple of years, everything that happened before is almost a flat line. And so that's how I like to interpret this graph. Think of it like this, right? We've had, the term artificial intelligence was coined in the late 50s. And we've had active research going on where we've been doing various things that are characterized as artificial intelligence. If you think about the actual capabilities we have, it's actually pretty fair, I think, to call the progress from the late 50s to about 2017 is just about a flat line. It really almost doesn't matter relative to what's happened in the intervening time. This 5-year period was that period of deep research I was talking about where we kind of went from, oh, we actually, we have this new architecture that seems to be an unlock, and we started having this really accelerated returns on capabilities. And this is the period of time we're in now, where basically we've taken that and we're building on top of that, and we're pouring essentially all the investment that's going into tech into figuring out both how do we make these models better, how do we come up with new generations of architectures, but also how do we build around these things, how do we combine them in interesting ways to solve real world problems. The thing I don't like on this is, a lot of these charts tend to put on things like, when are we going to get to artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence? If those terms aren't familiar, I'll explain them really quickly. These aren't really well defined, but the idea behind artificial general intelligence is, when do you have a machine that's as smart, as capable in every way as the average human? When do you have a machine where you could ask it to do anything you could ask a reasonably educated, intelligent person to do, and it can do it as well or better? When are we going to get that? That's a philosophical question. A lot of people believe it's not possible. We won't actually get to that. A lot of people believe in some ways we're already there. Regardless, I don't think it's useful to talk about when do we get to that. I think this is too hard to predict and way too hard to predict in terms of like when do we get past that. But what I think is really clear is this is the shape of the innovation curve. This is what's happening. This is the window of time we kind of find ourselves in right now, where we are kind of, people are using these tools to gain competitive advantage in every way they can. We talk a lot about like things like regulation and how we should handle that. And once we get out of this range, I think this is where it's kind of it's too late, right? You're going to use AI because it's going to be given to you as part of kind of how it's been packaged up and given to you. But if you want to understand this, get any sort of in this audience investment advantage of it, or just personal productivity advantage out of it, this is the period of time to really get involved with it and understand it. I mentioned like I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this talk talking about like there are huge ethical, societal implications to all this. I'm super interested in that. I'm just not going to spend a lot of time talking about it today because we could spend the whole time talking about it and it'd be a fun talk. All I want to say about it is like I'm going to kind of I'm ignoring those things for today, not because they're not important. I think they're super important, but the way to deal with those, maybe we should slow down. A lot of people have the opinion maybe we should slow down. Maybe we're taking this too fast. Maybe there's risks. Maybe we're going to displace too many jobs. Maybe there's other risks. Those are all super valid concerns. But the way to deal with them is not to ignore it and say, well, I'm just not going to participate in that. I think if you care about however you feel about those issues, the only way to kind of be part of this conversation is to actually be part of the conversation, use these tools, understand what they can do. Because I guarantee your competitor, however you phrase that, either your competitor personally, if we think nationally, if we think kind of national interest, like however you slice it, the competition is not putting on limiters to how they're going to use these to gain strategic advantage. So if you want to understand what these things can do, you have to kind of use it yourself. Those are just more illustrations of the same point, but I'm going to skip through them at the same time. So yeah, the best way to learn about AI is to use it. So I'm going to go through a few kind of very hands-on type of examples, things that I do, just to kind of, what I really want to highlight is like, this is not a menu of just go do these exact things that I do, and it's going to make your life better. These are examples of how I interact with it. I really want to encourage you all to think about this. Like, what I'm actually encouraging you to do is install these tools, install ChatGPT on your phone. I'm going to show you some things of that later. Use them use them on the web. Use them on your devices. Learn by iterating and having a conversation with these tools how they can impact you. Look at this as an example, and that's really my my main point here. I threw this in because this article came out just like maybe a month ago at this point. The Shopify CEO made a lot of splash with these headlines. The headline around this was, staffers have to prove that a job can't be done by AI before asking for more headcount. It's a very successful multinational public company who basically came out and said, globally across our company, hiring freeze. No new person gets hired without written documentation of why the job that you're proposing to hire a person to do couldn't be done better by AI. He actually didn't write something that simple. He wrote this 4-page note that he put out there. It's actually, I think, incredibly well written. And I pulled a couple bullet points from it, which is, reflexive AI usage is now a baseline expectation at Shopify. If you work at my company, I expect you, as a part of your job, to use AI to figure out how to automate, improve, make more efficient everything you do, period. I don't care what role you're in, that is my expectation. What we've learned so far is that using AI well is a skill that needs to be carefully learned by using it a lot. It's just too unlike everything else. And he goes on in this to say, everyone in the company is saying, we'd love to use this, but you have to train us on it. And he's saying, no, I don't have to train you on it because I can't. This hasn't been around long enough for there to be well-regimented training programs. I can't send you to AI school and have it really be effective. What I need you to do is install these tools on your laptop and start using them and figure out how they apply to your job. Learning is self-directed, but figure out how to share what you've learned. And then, the quote that got turned into the headlines, before asking for more headcount and resources, teams must demonstrate why they cannot get what they want done using AI. When I first gave this talk back in November, my clear guidance to everyone kind of getting started was, if you have no idea where to start, if you're like, okay, I hear you, Bryon, what do I actually do? Was go install ChatGPT. Is it necessarily the best tool? Not necessarily. There's a lot of these kind of general purpose tools, but it's kind of the original one. It's got a very user-friendly interface. It's the one that gets the most attention. It's still not a bad recommendation, although I would say what's changed in the last 7 months is that several other kind of very general purpose AI tools have gotten to the point where I think it's a lot more equivalent. So I would actually say, ChatGPT from OpenAI is still a very good choice. The Claude, which is put out by a company called Anthropic, is another very good choice. Almost equivalent and almost the same functionality, and they all have a few things that the others don't. And then Google's Gemini has actually gotten really, really good. And one benefit to Gemini is if you happen to be a very heavy Google user, if you use Gmail for your email, if you use things like Google Docs, Gemini is not only a good kind of general purpose chatbot, but it's also been embedded in those tools in ways that can actually help you. So I'm going to show examples of a couple of these. So let me jump into like what's kind of maybe the simplest, most baseline example, and just kind of show a little bit of, if you've never thought about how could I use this for productive work, this is kind of like the simplest possible thing. I know this is hard to read. I'm going to walk through it. I have these kind of videos of me going through an actual thing just to have an example. But so here's me talking to ChatGPT. And what I'm saying is, hi, my name's Bryon. I work for a made-up company called Chainwise, which is a supply chain software company. I met this woman who's a good sales lead for our company. Could you help me write an email to outreach to her? So it was very, very simple. I wrote a paragraph with a couple bullet points of text. And I said, could you write me a nice professional sounding email to reach out and ask for a meeting? This didn't save me a huge amount of time. It saved me maybe a couple of minutes of an email I certainly could have written myself. But what I want to highlight here is it was really that simple. I basically said, here's the profile of the person I want to reach out to. Here's a few pieces of information about them. Could you please just write me an email so I don't have to spend the time thinking and editing and writing? I could dash off these couple bullet points really quickly. I'd probably save myself maybe 5 or 10 minutes of writing a nice email. But if you think about this, now that I have this assistant who is instant and digital, and it doesn't really cost me much of anything to go back into interaction, I said, well, what if we carry that use case one step further? Say, okay, well, actually, great. I actually had my sales team go to a conference last week, and here's a spreadsheet of all the contacts that they made last week. There's a guy named Michael Brown in here. Could you write me an email for him? And by uploading that spreadsheet and saying, hey, I want to reach out to this guy, Michael Brown, it went in and read the spreadsheet for me and looked at the notes that my sales team made about Michael and said, oh, Michael works for Home Depot, and here's the things that the salesman captured about him, and it wrote a nice customized email. So again, this didn't save me a huge amount of time, but it saved me the point of I didn't have to go do any of the legwork, right? The system was smart enough that I said, here's a spreadsheet that has some information from my sales leads, and I want you to write an email about this person. Go read the spreadsheet, figure out the context, write me an email. Great, I now have an email I can copy paste. This saved me a bit more time. And then maybe y'all are guessing where this is going. It's like, well, if I can do that, it's really not much of a stretch at all then for me to say, great, actually, I just gave you a whole spreadsheet of emails, of information. Could you just write me an email for every one of those sales leads so that I can now have my outreach automated? And so it's gonna go think for a few minutes, and it's gonna come back with, absolutely, here I just made you a new version of your spreadsheet, and I added a new column to it, and for every single person that you had had the contact with, I wrote them a customized email that's addressed to them based on what their role is at the company they're at and what they told your sales team they were interested in. This is now saving me a significant more time. Again, this isn't I don't know if any of you have this exact use case. What I'm trying to point out here isn't this is what you should all go do. This is the kind of interaction you can have with it. Stop thinking about the technology as a piece of software that I have to go learn and how to use. Think of it like a really intelligent intern who's well read on just about every topic, because literally these models have read everything published on the internet, which is a mind-boggling thing to think about, right? No one person has done that. These models have. So if you want to, you can use them to, it understands when it says, oh, this person works at Home Depot and they're in procurement. It knows what that means. It understands what that means. I mean, it also, if you're like, I'm really curious about quantum computing, what is that all about? Could you teach me quantum computing? It's also really good at that. Anything that there is published information on the internet about, you now have an intern who costs you nothing, essentially. The cost of these tools rounds to zero if you're using it for more than a couple minutes a month. It's very well read on all these topics. It doesn't get tired. It responds immediately. It can basically do any of these kind of tasks. So these couple examples were really kind of around content generation. So I thought about this audience a little bit and tried to do maybe like a slightly more relevant example that kind of carries it, of something that might be closer to y'all's lives. That would be a more real world example. So I'm imagining that something folks here do is consider pitches from investors who would like to get seed stage investment in their companies. So, one thing I want to call here is if you go search for things, there are a lot of what I would call focused tools out there coming up. These are AI products that basically package up and say, we have an AI product that will help you evaluate pitches, or we have an AI product that will help you do X. Some of those are great. Many of them are what I would consider to be snake oil, that are basically a very thin wrapper on top of these general purpose tools. So before you go kind of Google for the hottest new tool from a company you've never heard of that purports to solve a particular use case, I would recommend get comfortable with these general purpose tools like ChatGPT enough to be able to go use them and try to solve your problem yourself with those tools. That will help you really evaluate whether another tool on the market is actually doing something of real value, or whether it's actually packaging up a couple of pretty simple conversations that you could have had yourself and actually putting you at arm's length from the AI and making it harder for you to get what you want to get done. So what I'm going to walk through here is using ChatGPT, the completely general purpose thing, to go through I want to evaluate a pitch from an investor and use this to help me in my process. I'm not an expert in doing this. I mean, I've pitched a few companies myself, and I helped a few VCs do due diligence on deals. Y'all are better experts than me on this, but I think you'll kind of see my point on this is that, I'm not doing anything that requires any sort of technical expertise at all. If you can hold a conversation and copy and paste text and drag a file, you can use these tools, and I think you can see how they can actually help you streamline some of your work. So I know this is really small, hard to read. I'm gonna walk through it. So first thing I'm saying here is review this pitch deck and give me a quick summary of the traction and opportunity. And I drop in a link to a pitch deck. This is for the company Buffer, if you've ever heard of it. There's nothing interesting about this pitch deck other than they happen to publish it on the internet. That's it. It was available on the internet, so I pumped it in. It read the deck, kind of gave me a breakdown of here's how we see the market opportunity, here's the traction they're highlighting. I said, great, imagine we're evaluating this for a seed round investment. what questions would you have asked the founders about their business? And it basically comes back to me with, here's an interview script I would use if you were going to sit down with this founder and ask them questions. It's pretty thorough. I would probably ask it to cut this down to half the size and focus on some things. The next thing I said is, okay, I want to plug them into our financial model and see how the business would fare if we quantified it. And then I drag in the spreadsheet that I have, which is my internal SaaS metrics financial model. Many investors, certainly VCs, have something like this. They have their standard model. And it said, okay, would you like me to basically go through and just populate this spreadsheet with the information from the investor's deck? Yes, I would. I would like you to do that very much. And so it went and filled in the spreadsheet, basically populated with whatever numbers that the company reported in their deck. It inferred some things. It came back with some, here's the growth and revenue assumptions based on what the team said. Would you like me to help you visualize that? Yes, I would. So it's, and again, my interactions here are mostly yes, I would, or yes, but maybe a little bit like this. It's predicting what I would probably want it to do yes, and it's getting it next, and it's getting it right most of the time. Sorry, that flashed by quickly. Did it show a chart there really quickly? I think it, I'm talking and didn't watch when here it is. It's a, so, and then, here it's showing, okay, great. Having plugged in their self-reported numbers and put them into our model, surprise, surprise, their revenue goes up and to the right, which is probably like every single investor pitch you've ever seen. Of course, if I take their self-reported numbers and plug them in, everything goes up and to the right, and the TAM is unlimited, and everybody's great. But but the point here is, a lot of this work is, I did this all in about I think I sped this up a little bit because I type slow and I was thinking through what to say next. But I mean, real time, I think I spent 10 minutes complete, start to finish. And I plugged in a deck that's not a real investment I'm considering, obviously, but it was a real investor deck that Buffer used to raise money 10 years ago. I plugged in a spreadsheet that I found online. Take a real investor pitch deck that somebody sent you. Take your real financial model. Take additional information that you have that you use when you're evaluating investments. Probably have a longer than 10-minute conversation where you ask it to go off and do some web research on the company, the founders, the competitors, all those other things. This is a tool that absolutely can replace a lot of the footwork and research and things like that that you would otherwise have to do when you're evaluating investment. And again, I don't know if this is the right use case that actually adds a lot of value to y'all's lives, but I was trying to think of something that would kind of resonate with the CTAN community that I could show in 10 minutes. My main point here is really, I am a really talented software engineer. I can code a lot of things, and I used 0 of those skills here. I used my skills to be able to think pretty well in a structured way and have a conversation. Yeah. Yeah.
About 30 angel groups to see if they're using AI. 3 of them came back with a report that basically indicated the evaluation of companies that they're looking at and the due diligence that's being performed now being done using AI. So the initial due diligence reports, which they select 8 to 10 criteria, these 3 groups, Launchpad Venture Group, Green City Angels, are now using AI to write reports, ask questions, and to compare the likelihood of success of companies, which they're putting in criteria and excluding.
Totally.
Blown away.
Yeah, for anyone online who couldn't hear, I'll just repeat that real quick. Like, what was brought up was reached out to 30 groups and 30 groups to ask them how they're using AI, and 3 of them came back, basically said, we're comprehensively using AI to do all of our first pass due diligence, benchmark against other companies. That's kind of the high pass filter before you even get to talk to a human analyst, which I think is, is definitely where it's going, no matter how, whether you like it or not. Yeah.
Do you think that's an indicator of why they're some of the largest? They're adopting new technologies, putting them to work.
There's a lot of other criteria that forms them to be successful in ours. This is just another one of many. Okay.
Yeah.
I was blown away when I got staff.
A lot of angel groups don't have staff.
Yeah. I assume that was kind of part of the criteria why it only has 30 versus the 300 it could have had.
Yeah.
The second part is investment. Who's here on the investment rate? Is there a reason we can't can't take the pitch deck.
A little bit background about why PCA is useful tool, because this selecting process and deal flow is different from all of them. So PCA has a small group of people who pre-screen all the deal flow, and the purpose is the voting mechanism is based on the PCA fund investors vote to do that. So they have volunteers, but they do not have the number of volunteers we have each year. And they always have the same people doing this. So they start to lose the engagement of all the members. And they start thinking, we're seeing all the same deals. AI on the first, they only, and all the same thing. So do we see any commonalities? So they pull all the past historical data to the training model.
Yeah.
And they found similarities. Okay, so this valuation is too high. This term sheet, we don't like it. This model thing. So they start to use it and to save time for PCA group.
So you're essentially saying they train their own model.
They
They got enough data in there to train their own model.
They use their own data, they train their own model, and it's very impressive, the result.
Yeah.
So after the test result, they use the test result, the train data and apply to the test data, and ask the members, will you agree with this report? Initially, yes. Like the team, financial forecast, the pattern, is it yes or no? Competition, we agree upon the competition to talk about, because that requires some of the external research. Like who are the competitors or substitutes, alternatives. So they use AI and use their own model. So PCA is not intended to share this, but mostly for now is internal use.
So Bryon said that the first question that comes to mind with that discussion is confidentiality. So they're taking, and I will talk about TCA, but let's imagine that we wanted to go do this.
Yeah.
We get pitch decks sent to us. Those are that's confidential information. That's not public information.
Yeah.
As we're dumping it into, let's say, ChatGPT 4.0, how do we continue to abide by the confidentiality rules?
Yeah. Great question. I'm gonna go a slightly different route first and then come back to that, because I think two things just came up and I want to hit them both. So give me one, like, because one thing that was just coming up, and just in case people online couldn't hear all the like one of the topics that came up was a lot of these groups that are actually using AI for investment decisions are actually doing things, far beyond what I'm suggesting here, which is of huge value, which is training their own models. So they're basically taking past history of these pitches, and then we know the outcomes of what happened here, right? We know this pitch looked like this. We know we made this investment decision. We know what the outcome was. Let's use that as a predictive model. That's incredibly valuable. That frankly is not the sort of thing that I would say, hey, you could all just go learn. Like, that is where you actually do need data scientists, real deep machine learning training, like to train those kind of predictive models. That is very much a difficult engineering task, well worth the investment, especially when you're talking about high stakes, like making big investments like this. But two separate things. I think you can use these kind of tools for automating a lot of that initial kind of research assessment. But if you want to do truly predictive things, you're gonna evolve to that. So I just want to separate those two things, because it's easy to get kind of confused, and I don't want to come out and say all AI is easy, everyone can do all of it. What I am saying is, like, if you want to understand the power of these tools, digging in on these tools yourself as leaders, as folks who kind of need to think about how do I contextualize making those bigger investments, this is something you should be engaging with directly, so you can think about and frame, and both are really important. And then you're asking a great question, Gary, which was how do we think about confidentiality, right? We're handed these pitch decks. We need to treat those with confidence. Can I reliably put these into something like ChatGPT, and can I feel safe in so doing? So a couple different answers there. One is, generally yes. So the way these large language models work, the way deep learning works, and this is a really common misconception. A lot of people believe when I have this conversation with this generative AI model, it's learning from what I'm saying and remembering it in the model, and it's going to actually embed that into its memory. And that is false, almost universally false. There are certain kinds of models that actually do sort of work that way. None of the common mainstream ones you interact work with. What that means is, like, when you're interacting with ChatGPT, that model's a fixed point. That model has been trained. Remember I mentioned you have to have thousands of machines, spend tens of millions of dollars. Those training rounds are discrete. That means this model is trained on a huge corpus of data, and that model, that set of weights, doesn't ever get any smarter. It doesn't learn anymore. It has learned to its capacity and it is fixed. So when you're talking with ChatGPT, the model itself is not remembering what you're saying. It doesn't embed any of the information that you give it or any proprietary information into it. What can happen is it can remember the conversation, remember the things you told it, and store that off to the side so that in the future, when it does another training round, it can use all that data to train the next generation of the model, make it smarter. Does that distinction make sense? Because I know that could sound like I'm just saying the same thing, but it's actually a very important distinction. When you're using these things, they're not inherently getting any smarter or remembering any of what you tell them. They are storing it to the side. And then when you're using these tools like ChatGPT, these things that are certainly whenever you're paying for these things commercially, there is always an option. Usually it's the default. Some places it's not, so you have to be careful. But there's always an option to say, my conversation is private. You may not use this to train in the future. And so you can obviously you have to understand the terms. Some people might ask you, some people will ask you, don't share this model with generative AI because they don't trust what I'm saying here. So I can't say that you aren't legally, you might be legally obligated not to share with these models because the people who are sharing you the deck specifically forbid you. But just from a general privacy and are you keeping it confidential, pasting a link to the deck into a ChatGPT window where you've said don't train on my data, from a terms and conditions of how OpenAI works, they can't and won't use your data to train a future model. So you are keeping that confidential. Yeah. Yeah.
And does it have a on-off privacy switch?
Yeah.
So we could in fact use that to, even if just to summarize information for the deal without a confidentiality.
Correct.
Okay.
Again, without giving you legal advice that you aren't legal. So I deal with this all the time, right? Because we deal with companies at data.world, we deal with companies very sensitive, and like some of our customers were like, yeah, I don't care about OpenAI's T's and C's. You may not send our proprietary information to them because we don't trust them to abide by their own T's and C's. So you might have a legal obligation not to share it with them, but it would be explicit. There's, if you share it with those privacy controls on, it's being kept in confidence.
And even then, it would still be the next model that would share it, not the existing.
Correct.
It would be a future problem, not today.
Correct. And one thing that can be confusing if you start using these tools, I don't want to sound like I don't want you to always use these tools and say, hey, Bryon, you're a liar. These tools do in fact sometimes have a memory. So if you start using ChatGPT, it's going to come back and say, oh, hi, Bryon, I remember you and I know about you. And I want to be clear, that is not embedding that into the model. That's not the model getting smarter. That's essentially the model has a little scratch pad on the side where it keeps notes about you that it can refer back to. And again, I know this is all super confusing if you don't know how this works, but it is very explicitly not building that back into the model where anyone else can share it. It's basically you have the model that everyone shares, which never gets any smarter. You have a personal scratch pad where it keeps notes about you and all the interactions it's had that it can refer back to. So you don't have to constantly tell it your name and where you work and what you do. And it keeps that private to you and it uses that to drive your conversations. Yeah, Kevin. Yeah.
There's a difference between going and doing blood work and then there's what humans can do, and then there's the hey, you probably need data scientists, AI, et cetera. Just as we think through how we might apply this to our processes, there's also middle ground where we don't have to stick with our current processes of work. For example, we filter out companies all over the place, right? Run around the road and let around the coding, et cetera. We could instead use what's available to us, come up with a scorecard. We could say, we want to know every company that comes through.
Yeah.
Please find any competitor of theirs that they don't list in their deck. Just give us that list. And then we keep the human in the loop where we use our expertise to review these things at times. So there's a lot of creative things that we can do in the middle ground.
Yes. And absolutely. And like, as you start using this more and more structurally, I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head. Like these are really powerful tools, but think of them like tools, not like a magic fox in Oracle that knows everything better than you. A group of investors like this has way more relevant institutional knowledge among the member base of like how to make good investments. And so the way I would think about using this tool is not, hey, ChatGPT, which of these 10 companies should I invest in? That's going to get you an answer that's guaranteed to be less good than if all the people in this room did the collaborative process you always do. But if you took the collective intelligence of the people in this room and thought about how do we evaluate deals? What are our criteria? What are our past indicators? What is the collective knowledge of this group of folks? Use that to build up a rubric of here's how we tend to evaluate deals when we do our collaborative process. Now I can go to ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, here's 100 deals that we wouldn't have time to process because we wouldn't have time to process through our normal process. Here's our rubric for how we think about deals. Which are the 10 we should actually go spend real human time on? Which are the ones that are the highest likelihood of being yielding investments that we would actually be interested in? 100, oh yeah.
They're using ChatGPT AI to screen an infinite number of companies down to the best options, and they take a look at the best options.
They're using it primarily to write literally their due diligence reports. They use it.
Uh-huh.
Now we get it back to 10 minutes.
For sure that, but I think it plays in all aspects where you filter down to the ones you really want to spend time on, and then you use ChatGPT to
There is some of that. They found it immensely helpful for 10 minutes, literally very detailed, very comprehensive due diligence.
One of the general class of use case I use it for probably the most, and I use it a lot for things like software engineering, but for the most is like synthesized communication. Like you think about that due diligence report, right? I'm imagining that when you're putting that kind of report together, you've got many people who are all doing little bits of like, how do you think about this? How do you think about this? You've got tons of informal information there. You've got email threads, you've got maybe Slack or other DM threads. You've got maybe a few kind of topical reports people have written up. Maybe you have the recording, a transcript of a video call where a few people sat together and had like the ability to take all that raw content, dump it into the LLM and say, here's the recording of a call, a transcript of a call we had, and here's an email thread where we discussed this, and here's some hand scribbled notes that aren't well formatted, but have the basic factual information I need from my analysts. And here's the template for our due diligence reports. Could you just go fill this out for me? And to have it go off and spend 10 minutes like you're describing and come back with a drafted report in the format in formal professional language. And by the way, if you just take that report and email it off, that's a complete dereliction of duty. You should never do that, right? You're still you are still accountable for the content, right? These are tools, but it's not hard to imagine that these tools can basically take that template for how we like to format things and a bunch of raw material and give you a draft that you can now go in, and you or your team, whoever does these things, can now go in and spend minutes or an hour editing and finalizing the doc that would have taken 10 or 15 or 20 hours to compose and thoughtfully put together. I could describe 30 use cases in my life that all boil down to some version of that. The first use case the first kind of actual life-changing at work use case that Gen AI solved for me, like in early 2024, right after ChatGPT, or 23, when ChatGPT came out, was I all the time get notes from our sales team of, hey, I'm talking to this prospect and they want to understand how our technology integrates with technology A, B, and C in this weird use case with this weird compliance regime. And for me to have to sit down and type up, a thoughtful, customer presentable explanation of how our very complex technology works, it's 15 minutes of my time, but it's 10 or 15 minutes of my time 6 times a day, constantly while our sales team's out in the field. I immediately switched to a mode where I can rattle off 3 or 4 bullet points of, we do this, and here's a link to our docs on this. And I had a chat window that would just give me back a blurb that's ready to be copy pasted and sent to the prospect. I type in my couple notes, it takes me 1 minute. I get back that blurb. 9 times out of 10, it's perfect as is. Maybe I change a few words. I copy paste it back to the sales guy and I'm back about my day. And it was not the use case I thought AI would change my life on, but I'm like, I just got an hour and a half back in my day of the thing I like to do least in the entire world, which is sit down and think for 15 minutes about how to explain our very complex technology to a non-technical person. That was a great conversation. I'm going to blast through a couple of things here because we don't need to show all of the examples, but one one of the things I think is a useful tool that exists in all of these things. This is the one in Gemini, but OpenAI has, ChatGPT has one of these as well, is the ability to create your own chatbots. So we've been talking about just the general purpose ChatGPT, where you can go ask it essentially anything. But one of the things that's true about these generative AI tools, and this is something that's going to sound very counterintuitive. This sounds like, when I say this to people, they're like, that can't be true. That literally can't be true, and it's absolutely true. These tools are better at accomplishing tasks when you tell them how good they are at accomplishing that particular task. When you tell them they are an expert in this field. As a like specific example, if you go to ChatGPT and say, hey, I've got this rash on my left toe, what could it be? Or if you say, hey, you're an expert dermatologist who knows a lot about various skin diseases, hey, you assign it a role. You tell it who you are, what you're good at, what you're able to do. And not only, and that will, this is provable. Like, the scientific studies have been on this to prove it. It gets better answers and better results. It actually makes sense if you think about how these tools work. These tools have been trained on the whole internet. So they've read everything that's been publicly published. So they actually have, the information's in there. Your job when you're conversing with it is to narrow its focus down to the part of the information that it's learned that is the most relevant for your answer. The more context you give it about how to focus its attention on the part of what it has learned that will likely contain the right answer, the better it is. So when you tell the tool, you're a doctor like this, you're a thing like this. So this was an example I built for, I did this talk for a group of nonprofit folks, and I was basically helping them build a chatbot that was pre-trained on doing donor communications. So, not necessarily a relevant use case for this. But what these tools will allow you to do is, if you have a use case you repeat all the time, if you have something you're doing all the time, you can, instead of having to go into ChatGPT every time and say, you are an expert in investment analysis, who knows it, you can build a custom chatbot where you've baked those instructions in. You tell it, this is the kind of thing you are, this is the kind of thing you're good at, and whenever I come talk to you, you are able to actually, it gets quicker into that focus and can give you better answers. Does that make sense? All right. Yeah.
So, that's the other one.
Yeah.
And essentially create a unique ChatGPT in your account.
That's right.
And then you click on that. Okay.
That's right. So when you go into your ChatGPT account, you'll see all these various custom GPTs. You pick the one you want to talk to. The other thing you can do, in addition to telling it, instructions about what its role is, what its focus is you can give it additional, if you have private content that won't be in its training set. So if you have, this is really relevant inside of a lot of corporate use cases, where it's like, it's great that this thing has read everything on the internet. I've got a couple thousand pages of internal process documentation, things like that are necessary in order to be answer these questions. You can load that into that custom GPT. So every time you talk to it, it knows, oh, and I should go consult these documents as well for that context.
That data is not like that.
It's
loaded every time.
No, it's persisted in that custom GPT, but private to you. And it's not, and it's persisted, but it's not actually used to retrain the model. So the model itself doesn't get smarter. Remember I mentioned, like, the memory about you is basically like a notepad. Think about those couple thousand pages of documentation as it's got a little library of all of your documentation. So it hasn't learned and memorized everything that's in those books, but it knows that the books are there, and it has a little index card of them, and it knows it could go pull the book off the shelf and read it. I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but that's how I think about it. Yeah.
So for example, if you what you wanted to follow, right? So you can automate that process in your GPT.
Yeah.
And when you have a business card or information in your spreadsheet, GPT will go automatically in your spreadsheet and follow up, write an email. And if you wanted to review it, it's up to you how you train your model. Otherwise, it will send it. So it is kind of automation.
That's
So
true.
You interconnected your spreadsheet with your ChatGPT model and your email system to send out emails based on you entering something.
So it is kind of automate and consistently process like what you really want. So that ChatGPT is something like your conversation, but when you make the ChatGPT for you, so that is kind of automation.
Yep. Yeah, what she's bringing up is exactly right. Like, a lot of the other thing you can do with these GPTs it gets progressively more technical to set up, and so I don't actually have an example of it for this group, but it's a really good point. Is you can integrate the tools that you use directly into this, and so it could, you can evolve from generate me an email so I can copy paste it over to just go send this email on my behalf. I would urge everyone, just as a technologist and security expert, like, think very carefully before you give any of these AI tools actual access to your email. Like, I automate a lot of my life with AI, and that's one bridge I'm not crossing anytime soon. Like, my email is my identity. That's the keys to everything, my bank account, everything else. So what I've done, I set up a separate email account for a virtual assistant, and I gave my AI tools complete access to that. And so when I want to actually automate sending emails and things like that, they just don't come from me. There's a separate, this is my and I will go send emails and CC me into it, and go work with somebody on calendaring and set up a meeting with me. But there's no way I'm giving any of these tools access to my own personal email anytime soon. I know a lot.
Are you setting up that to do all of that?
Mhm.
Between all these different systems. Okay, so you're having to set something up.
We talked about the various different purpose tools. Like, the tool that's the best at this particular thing now, of like actually set it up to integrate with real world tools and automate things, is actually Claude, the Anthropic tool that we talked about. If you're interested in kind of exploring, hey, I really want to automate a lot more of my life, I'd recommend checking out Claude by Anthropic. That's the one that they're really focusing on, that use case now, on how do I actually make it easy for you to, not just have this kind of chat conversational interface, but actually have it have agency in the world and go out and integrate with everything else in your life.
So you don't need third-party apps like Zapier to do that?
You don't. I mean, you could do a lot of things directly with integrations that you can go straight to Claude. Yep. Yeah.
We have to transfer data and make some compatibility with that. But for automation process, the ChatGPT or like systems really have a different system, and how you want to grow your automation, that is great.
I'll give you examples of work on board. A lot of effort. Can I spend $100 on who reads the policy document? So now all policy documents go in and say, what's our expense policy? I'm thinking of this. Right? So there's documents that are in G Drive or SharePoint, depending on the vendor you choose.
Yeah.
They'll just point at them and go. Then we have other GPTs that are, I can go in and say, which clients is the revenue run rate behind this month versus So that requires the developer to read the code, just access the database. But that's it. Once they do it once, I, as the idiot, can just go in and ask whatever I want. So the Zapier use case would be more on, I don't have the data in a system with natively access. I need to get it into them so they.
Yeah, I mean, and this is great. I mean, I think, just a lot of these kind of next step automation. I mean, it's actually it's a pretty quick leap. For folks who are maybe coming to this from, I'm still kind of bewildered by this. I think, starting with the getting in, understanding how these conversational interfaces work, all the things we're talking about here do kind of follow pretty naturally from that, right? Once you kind of get a step of like, I can interact with this thing, I can ask it to perform tasks, I can ask it to help me, generate brainstorming and content and things like that. Integrating with these tools becomes the next obvious thing. And yeah, some things you probably do need a little bit of like IT support to set up. Like, not all these things are quite yet self-serviceable by the non-technical folks, but the familiarity with the tools is the same. Getting yourself the familiarity with these tools, then when you get to the point of like, and another point you brought up too is, I'm really focusing here on like, what should you personally go do right now on your phone in your personal life to get access to this? When you start thinking about these things organizationally, if you're in an organization that's like a heavy Google user, I would lean toward using Gemini because it's already there and integrated. If you're in a heavy Microsoft shop, use Copilot, which is really just built on the OpenAI models. It's the same models as OpenAI, it's just the Microsoft flavor of it. All these tools are close enough to equivalent in capability that the tool that exists where all your data is the right one for your organization to use, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, another thing that was brought up, it's a great point. I want to add this into my talk for next time, just because I think it's becoming ubiquitous enough. I didn't include it in this talk for a while because you couldn't actually access it in most of the free tools, and I wanted to have things, but now it's actually ubiquitous. But he's talking about the deep research capabilities, and if you've heard the word, like most of these things you've kind of seen, it's like a chat interface, I ask it a question, it comes back with an answer. What the deep research capabilities are is when you turn that mode on with these tools, you say, I'd like you to go produce me a really thorough deep research about this topic. You give it a sentence or a couple paragraphs about what you want to analyze, and it does two things. One, it goes off, and it's not just a simple, like, here's a quick response. It goes off and spends often 10, 15 minutes of doing many, many, many iterations on building out a thorough, structured, broken down analysis of this topic. So it gets you a lot of content with very little of your time, right? You ask it one question, you come back 15 minutes later, you have a thorough research report you can read. But the second part of this, which is actually, I think, the way more important part, rather than just it does a lot of work at once, is it is research in the sense of those documents won't contain anything that isn't backed up with referenced documentation. It's not just coming back, you hear about hallucinations, and sometimes the LLMs get it wrong. Yes, that's true, just like human beings, by the way. Like, if you ask somebody to go write you 10 pages off the top of their head without doing any research, you're gonna find some hallucinations in that too, no matter who the human being is, I promise. What this deep research does is actually an attempt to really start to work around that problem of, it goes off and researches by searching the web, by finding and so it's gonna come back with a multi-page report, and every single thing that it says in that report is gonna be footnoted with, and here's the link on the internet where I actually found this research and read it. So could it still be wrong? Yes, of course. Just like a person could go research, but it's all fact checkable. Everything you get in that report is going to be something where if you're like, this is really interesting, before I make a $10 million investment decision on this, I really want to know this is right. Well, here's the link to where I pulled that from. You know, do you trust this report or do you not? Yeah. They all have that, all the three main ones for sure, and another tool called Perplexity, which is really great at this. They all have deep research built in. I don't know if they all have one in their free mode at this point. Like, some of them, some of these things, get into the, like, you quickly escalate to where you have to get into the paid model in order to use it. So, but I know for sure Claude, Gemini, and OpenAI all have great deep research, and at least OpenAI and Gemini, you could use it for free in the free version. I don't know about Claude. I don't remember. Right. Yeah. It's like, yeah, explainability is just as important as correctness, right? It's like, if you give me something that's like, I think this is right, I'm like, well, that's great. That's very interesting. It might be useful, but if I don't go do further research, I can't use this for anything real. Yeah. I only have a couple more things in here. I'm going to go through them real quick, and this has been great Q&A. And so I just, one of the use cases that's getting eaten up really, really quickly is using AI for software development. There's one company I love telling the story. I met with here at Capital Factory just as a mentor, and I got connected with them. So like, hey, these guys are doing some really interesting things with AI coding. Want to talk to you. I learned as much from them as they did from me. Hopefully, I was helpful to them too. But like in the conversation with them, I was talking to their CTO, the guy kind of doing all their technology, and he was like, yeah, he's like, well, we just got this philosophy of like, we only write code that writes code. Like, if I write any software, it's only tools to help the AI write better software. And I said, well, that's great, that's great, but that works really well for like small greenfield things. When you're just starting a new project, I bet the AI can do really well. I work at a real company where we've got 1 million lines of code, going back 10 years, and like, it's really hard for the AI to have enough context on this giant code base that a bunch of people wrote to do it. I'm like, so as your code base gets bigger and more complicated, how are you going to deal with that problem? And he looked at me, and he didn't say, well, old man. He thought it. I could see it in his eyes. but he looked, he's like, yeah, he's like, that sounds like a really hard problem. He's like, I guess I'm just kind of maybe naively thinking that, you know, I just kind of like, I'm just going to keep, I started this way and I'm going to keep it this way. And he's like, when I have to go in and make a big change, I don't really care if the AI has to rewrite just a tiny bit of the system or a whole lot of it. I've just set my system up to where I tell it what I need it to do, and I tell it to keep the code kind of in small bits. And if the bits get bigger than they need to be, it has to break it up into small bits. And I don't really, you know, like with a human, you're resisting, I don't want to go rewrite this system because it's going to take a lot of time and it's going to cost a lot of money. He's like, but I don't really have that problem. If I'm like, if I have to take this system and completely rewrite it, I just tell the AI to do that and it's done tomorrow anyway. And, you know, and I'm sure, I mean, it's not like this guy has it completely solved and AI for coding is something so solved, but it was that mind shift that I hadn't made yet. And it was like, I needed somebody much, you know, just much newer to this to kind of kick me in the pants to think like, yeah, that's the right way to think about it. Like, I don't think the problem's solved yet, but I'm still thinking of it from the point of view of like, rewriting a piece of code to make it easier to maintain is hard and expensive, and we tend not to do it. I'm like, it's not hard and expensive anymore. Like, if the right thing to do to make the code more maintainable by AI is to break that piece of code up into 10 smaller modules to make each of them smaller to maintain, that's not an expensive thing to do. So the AI kind of hits on both sides of the ROI equation, right? If you can have AI able to write your software and build your features, you can move a lot more quickly and have a lot more competition. And the only barrier to doing that is the cost it takes to like perfectly maintain your code and keep it really easy for the AI to understand. That cost has driven to near zero as well. So the cost is driven to near zero for having clean, well-maintained code that's easy to update. And the ROI for doing so is really high. And it just, yeah, go ahead, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so actually, this is a really important, like this is my next set of talks I'm gonna give because I'm super passionate about this. It won't be for this audience, this is like for the engineering group, but like really quick on this, like the whole notion of vibe coding, which is this kind of common trend of like, you don't need engineers anymore. Like you don't need a technical co-founder. If you have a business idea, just go pick up one of these AI tools and build it all yourself and it's gonna be fine. That is gonna leave a lot of smoking craters in the ground. If you talk to a founder who's like, I'm so smart, I'm vibe coding, I'm never hiring an engineer, I'm just gonna go build this myself, run 100%. And I have 100% confidence in this because this just is basically fundamental computer science, which is there's a ceiling to how much complexity that's going to work for. So it is 100%. In fact, I'm gonna show you an example here. I'm gonna let it run while I'm talking just because we're close in. This is me building a app from nothing using Claude Code, which is probably the best AI coding tool available right now. And this is going to flash by. Just to give you an idea of what's going on here, I'm not writing any software here at all. I'm prompting it every once in a while with, I want the system to do this, I want it to do this. I'm doing something that one of those non-technical co-founders could probably do. And at the end of this, it's going to be done, and there's going to be a completely running web app that I could actually put up on the internet. And people are founding companies and doing this all the time and celebrating it and saying, yay, we're so smart. And what's going to happen in 100% of those cases, no doubt, if they don't bring in somebody before it gets out of control, is that code is going to be unmaintainable by AI or humans. We are not going to get smarter AI models that have bigger context windows that will magically solve that problem, because computer science is a study of complexity. Software systems are inherently complex in a way that, like, so to answer your question about tech debt, software architecture and tech debt matters so much more in the AI era than it ever did in the human era. In the human era, we had these kind of natural economic barriers of like, it doesn't make sense to clean up all your tech debt because it's really expensive to clean it up, and you got smart enough people who kind of know where all the bodies are buried and they can just kind of fix the problems. And we just ride that economic equilibrium, and that's where the tech debt sits. The ROI equation just got flipped upside down. The return of having really clean, well-architected code with no tech debt is now through the roof, because that's the code that AI can actually build on and maintain. The cost to do it is getting driven close to zero. So if you're talking to early stage companies, if they're not using AI at all, run, because they're going to be dead. They're going to move too slow. If they have a non-technical co-founder who's like, I'm never hiring an expensive engineering jerk who's going to come in and tell me that he's smarter than me, I'm going to do it all myself, run, because that technology is going to be a smoking crater in the ground within a year. If they're like, I got one really smart technical co-founder and I'm going to think really hard before I hire the second one, because that one guy with AI tools is going to produce all my code and we're going to maintain it, That's where I'm looking to invest. The company that's like, I want the smallest number of the most senior technical people using these tools for max return. That's who's going to win in this next phase. Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, yeah. Not just complexity pursuing also the different product you have.
Yes.
You have to understand your customer, your users, bill.
100%.
You have to make, you can build the most business in the world, but it's not the right thing for your market.
Yeah.
You're not.
Says the product consultant that I 100% agree with. I'm talking strictly about the engineering side of just once you know what you want to build, how are you producing it? But yeah, 100%. Yes. Yeah. I'm trying to put it through investor language. Yeah. Uh-huh.
All about who's got a trust relationship, how it's stuff. It's constantly using stuff. Agents. Hundreds of managers of code.
Yeah.
Isn't a competitive weapon. Competitive weapon is.
I mean, I think that's interesting. I think it's not my recommendation, only because I was just like, well, I mean, your job is to learn how to assess risk and make the right risks for return. And so I think it's actually a discernible problem. So I wouldn't say sit this entire round out and wait, or you're going to miss. I think there's a lot of opportunity to like figuring this out. So I don't know that my recommendation would be that. I think it's always been the case. And if you talk to any software, any engineer, I think they'll say this if they understand how the world really works. It's always been the case that like every line of code is a liability, not an asset. Your code is not your value. You want every line of code is a liability. Every feature in your product also a liability. The only thing that's an asset are the set of capabilities that you actually deliver to your end users. So you want what you want then, if you consider every line of code and even every feature from a product lens to be a liability, obviously you need features in order to implement capabilities, and you need code to implement those features. So you want the greatest, richest set of capabilities that addresses a real market need with the absolute smallest number of features and therefore lines of code to get there. That hasn't changed. It's just our ability to actually enact that at scale is changing. So I would definitely not say my recommendation is sit out the software, sit out this round. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, is a very, I'm gonna, rather than debate you, I'm gonna say it's a very interesting topic. I'd love to have the conversation, but I mean, I do take your point. I think the economics get really complicated when you get to the scale of a Microsoft. I would actually argue they do that pretty well, given the massive behemoth of a company they are. But I take your point. Yeah.
So you're evaluating two companies that are functionally perfect. The one that has one product manager that records all the meetings, shoves it into Git for the developers to apply, pick it up, process it, update the backlog.
Yep.
Automatically. The one that's waiting for a week, have the meeting, talk about it,
yeah.
sit in an agile meeting, it's not there. I think part of it is also evaluating software companies as a company,
yeah.
not just
the companies that are like, I've got one world-class expert in each kind of functional area who's going to use AI to the greatest extent are going to be the winners. The ones who are like, we don't believe in AI, we're just doing it the good old-fashioned way, and the ones who are like, we don't even need the expert, we'll just have AI do everything. I think both edges of that curve just fail in very different ways. Yeah. 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 Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah. the software, yeah, the software. I mean, the software business roadmap's going to be rewritten for sure. I mean, I agree with you on that. I think how exactly is hard to predict, but yeah. Yeah.
New generation software.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Those are all publicly available. I don't need
Yeah.
a subscription to go access that data.
Yeah.
But to my knowledge, and there's a trove of data. And there's deed records.
Yeah.
From a real estate perspective, it'd be monumentally valuable.
Yeah.
That's a lot of heavy.
I'm not specifically aware of any. I doubt that that's on the near-term horizon for any of the big players to go solve on their own. Like that's probably like a near to mid-term opportunity for somebody to go kind of build a tool that sits on top of these models. Those wouldn't be available in a public crawl, so they're not directly available. But I'd be surprised if somebody wasn't going off and building a tool that's basically doing what's called a RAG architecture, retrieval augmented generation, on all those county clerk records, where they're basically going out and harvesting them through whatever means and making them available as a tool on top of these. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's been companies going back. I mean, there's been companies going back 10, 15, 20 years whose business model is send foot couriers into the county clerk's offices with USB drives to grab that data, bring it all back together, aggregate it into a big database. If you have that big database, plugging it into these kind of tools is a nothing of effort. I mean, you could write the code in an afternoon if you had all that. So like I'm guessing if you went on the ChatGPT store and searched for custom GPT that has county clerks, I wouldn't be surprised if it already exists. I'd be surprised if some version of this tool doesn't exist if you go do a Google search for it. You didn't find it? Yeah. I will look and see if I don't think I have access to any tools you don't, but I'll look and see if I can find some. Yeah.
Ryan, I know you have a hard time.
I can probably go a couple minutes late. I'm okay. Yeah. I am. I was going to discuss. I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah. I'll hit that at the very end. Yeah. So yeah, this was just the end of that coding demo thing, and what I was going to show here is one of the things I love about Claude Code is at the end of every session, you can just tell it, okay, how much did it cost to do what we just did? And so you can see here, like that demo that I was running while I was talking, it went off and built a fairly complete full web application that you could, you could actually put on the internet and run. And it took 27 minutes of my time. I was doing other stuff too, so I wasn't really fully focused, kind of going back and forth and giving it some guidance. 14 minutes of its time, basically actually doing processing at a cost of $2.79. And I had this application up and running, right? That's just a fundamental, does this replace ever needing a software engineer? No, I don't think somebody who wasn't a software engineer could have gotten quite as good of results as I did because I knew how to guide it. But like, I wasn't writing code. I wasn't giving it any highly technical things. I was giving it some basic guidance. I promise I could not have hired a human software engineer to produce this for me in less than a half hour for $2.79. However you slice it, I got something, even if the code isn't that great and I have to go in and edit it myself and update it, just as a starting point that works that I can iterate from these tools. And it's actually much, much better than that. So yeah, the last couple of things I was going to hit on. Actually, I'm going to come back to this. Let me do this real quick. Just because we're close to time. One of these things I'm saying here with these slides is just one use case that kind of maybe goes hidden in these presentations is like visual communication. So all of these images that I produced in this slide deck and all the little video clips, I did all of these with AI. So I didn't just go find these images on the internet. I didn't hire a designer, and I'm certainly not a talented enough artist to produce any of these things. All of these things were me having a brief conversation with an AI saying, generate me an image that is this style that looks like this, and that's what produced all these. And if you dig in on any of these images, there's flaws in them, right? Like this doesn't replace fully having a human designer who would go out and actually design copy ready for the internet, ready for advertising, things like that. But I think it's hard to argue that this isn't like really high quality, compelling visual communication for a presentation like this. Like I could have never had images that were tailored to my presentation of anywhere near this quality without having access to tools like this. And same, these video clips, these are videos of people that do not exist. These are fake, videos I generated. One of the things I wanted to show you all, I think it's important to talk about some minor failures too. I mentioned Suno, which is OpenAI's video. So I was trying to put together a more elaborate kind of video representation of the things I'm talking about here, about a person who's kind of being really enabled by AI tools. And what I'm going to show you is a couple of iterations of my failures on that. I think, and it's simultaneously, wow, these tools are amazing. That's amazingly lifelike. But also, wow, that's a really bad, creepy video that probably doesn't effectively convey what you wanted to do. So, so this was my play. Okay, I guess this first one's frozen. So this was, so this was one of my creepy. This was one of my attempts at getting show me a person be enabled by all of her AI assistants and how much capable he is. This was I think, this was the very first one, that was just kind of the creepiest, and like it's the little things like what's going on here, right? I mean, each of those thumbs is a pretty good thumb, but there's two of them on this hand, and that's not really reflective of what you would expect. And if you back the video up a little bit, why is that hand just kind of crawling out from underneath that iPad? So all this to say, like these tools are pretty amazing, right? Each of the individual bits of this are incredibly lifelike. The lighting is amazing, right? Just look at the shadows and the lighting. Like it's kind of hard to imagine that I gave it a few words of prompt and got something that lifelike. But then also the mistakes are real. So yeah, the last thing I wanted to do, and that was Sora, which is OpenAI's tool. By the way, I mean, I was asking you to do some pretty complicated things. I don't want to give Sora a bad name. You can actually get some incredibly good videos that don't have a lot of those creepy artifacts. I've learned I'm not a very good director, is part of it, I think. So the last thing I wanted to hit on, and then I'll talk to what Gary was mentioning about the AI assistant. But like, as I encourage you all, like install these tools on your phone. So I'll try to use them. One thing that that I would actually encourage you to do too is use most of these tools, certainly ChatGPT, if you install their like mobile app, have voice mode now. And I use this a lot, and it's the same model, right? It's in some sense, it's exactly the same as what you're getting if you're typing to it in a chat interface. However, I find it to be incredibly different in terms of some of the results I get when I use the voice mode. And I don't think it's because the tool's different at all. I think it's because I'm different. When you start talking to these tools with a voice interaction, you very quickly start to humanize it and treat it more like a person. You stop editorializing your thoughts. Like when I'm typing, I'll go back and edit my thoughts and think through it and try to get very precise. Whereas when I'm talking to it, you can't unsay something, right? Once it's out of your mouth, think of it like you're having a conversation with somebody. So one of the ways I work a lot I go on a walk in my neighborhood, go spend 60, 90 minutes. I do a lot of work on those walks now. I queue up a lot of tasks I want to do. I will walk around and talk with my assistant and get a lot of real work done. And when I get back to my desk, all that work's queued up in our chat. I can now copy paste text and go do whatever I need to do. I do it in my car. If I'm on a long car ride by myself, I put it on the USB. So I was gonna have my AI assistant do a little bit of just Q&A, like rather than me doing a little Q&A. I know we've already done a lot of Q&A live, but just try this. It's actually worked pretty well. So maybe take a question or two. This isn't anything fancy. This is a Bluetooth speaker and something to hold my phone. So this isn't anything fancy. Okay, so we're at the end of my talk. You want to introduce yourself and do some Q&A?
Hi everyone, I'm an AI assistant here to help answer your questions about using generative AI in your daily work.
It's not really high here, so it's take long.
No, it's the volume. Hey, I'm sorry, I had your volume way too low. Could you repeat yourself? The volume was too low, nobody could hear you.
Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm an AI assistant here to help answer your questions about using generative AI in your daily work. Bryon just shared some great insights, and I'm here to dive into any questions you might have. Let's get started.
Just to not confuse her, anyone want to ask a question? I'm going to repeat it just because like the noise across the room gets hard for her to hear. So yeah,
So
Gary.
you talked about having a bulleted list of tasks you want to do. How do you get AI to go out and find that bulleted list of tasks, bring them in so you can work on them?
Okay. Yeah, so somebody in the audience asked, I mentioned how we work together a lot, like I'll go on a walk or in my car and we'll have a list of tasks we're working through. And he asked, how do we kind of manage that list of tasks so that we can have a conversation with voice and then I can access the results of our work when I get back to my desk?
Because if you have it in access, what's it find that?
Yeah.
Great question. Great question.
This is the bandwidth problem.
Great question. We
Also, I forgot to, she
manage tasks.
She's very polite. She will never speak over you.
Manage tasks by keeping a shared list that Bryon can add to or update while on the go. When he's using voice, I help capture and organize those tasks and then make sure everything is accessible when he's back at his desk. This way, all the work we do on the move is seamlessly integrated into his workflow.
Yeah, I think he was asking a more technical question, but actually it's a pretty low tech answer. I think he was asking how do we access the to-do list, and at least for how I work with you, really I just open up a chat window and type in the to-do list while I'm sitting at my desk, and then I turn on voice mode and go on the go and say, let's work through that to-do list. Yeah, so I think he was asking a more technical question, but there's really not a great technical answer because we just load it into the chat context, right?
Exactly. It's pretty straightforward. Bryon just types out the to-do list in our chat when he's at his desk, and when he's on the go, he switches to voice mode to work through it with me. All the tasks and notes we handle get saved right here, so there's no complex system, just a smooth, simple workflow.
Anyone else have it?
They just be ChatGPT open the whole day, and you're dumping stuff in there. It's just one session essentially for the day. You go back to the session, find my.
Yeah. I always have kind of like one main daily session where it's kind of like running work that I'm working on. Anyone else want to ask her anything? I can ask her a question or two that I know.
Have one daily session, that's a good way to manage it. Using the same session over and over each day.
Yeah.
That's what you recommend. Session.
Yeah. So somebody brought up a great point about, what would happen if we just used one long chat session forever versus kind of starting new chat sessions per day or per context. Can you talk a little bit about how people should think about managing context windows and conversational state with you?
Sure. Keeping one long chat session can help maintain continuity and context, especially for ongoing projects or tasks. However, starting new sessions for different contexts or days can help keep things organized and focused. It's a bit like having separate notebooks for different projects. This way, you can easily refer back to specific conversations and keep each session's context clear. It really depends on what works best for your workflow and how you prefer to manage your information.
What would happen if we kept one really long context window though? Like just thinking about how generative AI and how LLMs work, what would happen if you just had one conversation that went on forever? What would be the risks of doing that?
If you kept one really long conversation going forever, it could become harder to manage and navigate. Over time, the AI might struggle to maintain focus on the most relevant details, and important points could get buried in the history. The context window has a limit, so older parts of the conversation might not be referenced effectively, which could reduce the accuracy or relevance of responses. It's generally more effective to start fresh sessions for new topics or projects, which helps keep the context clear and the interactions more efficient.
first steps a novice should take?
For a novice, the first step is to start experimenting with small, manageable tasks. Try using generative AI for simple routine activities like drafting emails, brainstorming ideas, or summarizing information. This helps you get comfortable with the technology and understand its strengths and limitations. As you gain confidence, you can gradually integrate it into more complex workflows and see how it can best support your daily tasks. My pleasure. I'm glad it was helpful. If you have any more questions,
My phone was ringing. I think that was causing that interference. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
If you have like a senior engineer and AI in a system, time in 5 years from now, there won't be any engineers because all the AI replaced it.
Yeah.
There won't be any junior engineers.
To be the new senior engineers. Yeah. Yeah, it was a great question. I think you're asking like, how do we, two questions. How do we use it as a company? It's got kind of a big human crafted legacy code base that predates the AI coding era. And then how do we think about, just going forward, how do you get new, if there's no real reason to hire a junior engineer because AI can do that job as well or better than them, how do you ever get new senior engineers? So, on the first one, I mean, we are, our engineering team are using it heavily, and we are, absolutely, wherever we have tasks that are essentially net new functionality, new modules, new things, we're basically kind of maintaining that principle of this has to be, the quality and maintainability of this code is now 10 to 100 times more important than it ever was. So when you get to start a new module from a clean slate, use AI to not only build the feature, but build the feature and have a almost fanatical commitment to not letting this code become a mess. Because as soon as the code starts to become a mess, AI becomes really, really confused and hard to use it. By the way, that's the same thing that it takes to ramp up new human developers too. It's not different, right? So where we have the opportunity to do new greenfield things, we do that. What we're doing with our kind of, what we call our legacy code base, right? If you call everything that predates this era legacy, and I think you have to, and I think, by the way, we have a great engineering team. I think our code base is probably, I'll take the challenge, 90th or 95th percentile, best, cleanest architected documented code that exists in the real world of competitive venture-backed software companies, which is to say it's still nowhere near good enough for AI to actually understand it, right? Because you make trade-offs all day, every day. It's like, do I invest 10 times as much to build this code to be super robust and maintainable all the ways, or do I get this done to attack this segment of the market so I can go do the next thing? And we have 10 years of making the latter decision every time, right? So it's as good as it gets. I have really smart people who are going to do the best they can with those constraints. But now the constraints are different. Like you have to say, no, it's actually worth, I can spend the 10x effort because that 10x effort is done with AI. So on new stuff, religious, fanatical adherence to that principle, and it pays dividends, and I can see it immediately. On all the legacy code, we're kind of looking across all those code bases and where we have the opportunity to say, can we go in and shape this up? Can I go in and basically make the investment to take this module that needs to just be 10x, 100x better in order to do AI work in it and get that work done? If I can't, should I just throw this away and rewrite it from scratch and follow those principles from day one? And you can't go in with millions of lines of code and do that overnight. You have to actually, just like everything, you have to incrementally invest in that. It's fundamentally an economic and business decision more than a technical one. But that's how we're attacking it. Is at the end of the day, I think you end up with a code base. You have to end up with a code base that's just so much cleaner and more maintainable, or else you won't be able to effectively have AI do its job, and you won't be able to reap all these benefits. And then on your second question, I think it's a huge, it's a huge question, but I don't really see it as, I don't see the engineering jobs are going away as being a real thing yet. I'll put the big asterisk on. We talked about AGI, ASI here. Like at some point, if you believe fundamentally that like the curve keeps going and we're going to have AI that are just as smart and capable as all of us, including guys like me at the strategic, making all the technical decisions, then all of our jobs are potentially in question when I can have a software agent that could just do it. So that's a philosophical question, but like barring that, let's look at the near term of like the next few years and where things are. I think the job of software engineers is going to change. And so it's hard for me to imagine hiring a junior engineer the way that job is formulated right now, just given that I would probably rather have a senior engineer with an AI tool who would basically replace 6 or 7 or 10 junior engineers with that tool. But I think back to, I'm like just old enough that I can remember a time where you weren't a real software engineer if you weren't able to like drop down into assembly code, because if you wanted to write anything that actually had real performance characteristics, all these foofy high-level languages like C++ and Java just weren't good enough at compiling that high-level foofy language down to the machine code. And so if you wanted to do something real, you had to be able to drop down and write, machine-level assembly code. And so when I look at engineers on my team, some of whom are my age or a little bit older, and they're like, I don't know, we're not going to have any engineers anymore. Coding is gone. I'm like, how's your assembly? Haven't done it in 20 years. Exactly. And I think what's going to happen is you're not going to write a lot of Python or Java or whatever software. You're going to write a lot of English that a machine's going to use, but it's just a new compiler. The fundamental rules of computer science, your knowledge about how systems hang together, that was always your value, right? Just like code has always been a liability, like your value isn't your ability to churn out code that compiles as an engineer. Your value is understanding how the system hangs together and how to actually build a software system that works. And that's more valuable now than ever. So I don't exactly know how we will train a new generation of engineers who don't actually have to learn how to write Python or Java or whatever software language they write. But we've done it before, right? We've gone through this, in my adult lifetime, we've gone through a change where, the skill set has changed over significantly. We'll do it again. So. Oh yeah. 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 The trick is we have to learn how to teach people the fundamentals without going through cutting their teeth by writing all that code and failing. And I don't know that we know how to do that yet, but I mean, we as humans are pretty good at figuring those things out when there's enough economic incentive. And so I think we will. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah, I do have to go in just a couple minutes, but one more question or two and I'll hit yeah. Yeah.
Not just using twice as many cycles this work
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
That suggested a section.
Yeah. Yeah.
More or less beautiful, more or less models that
Yeah.
level. So, I mean, is there a major saturation point?
I mean, there's always likely to be some kind of like saturation point where things like I think what you're going to see, like, you're really talking about like just compute and electricity resource consumption is scaling right alongside those capabilities disproportionately. And so, what we're seeing now is like the feature war arms race among all these major players, right? All these companies, starting with OpenAI, but all these other companies are absolutely willing to spend billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions to go out and basically claim primacy in this space and lose money and fight against the, Google, who really structurally should have been the leader in this all along. They wrote the original paper and they had all the resources to do it, but they kind of got scooped in some ways. And I think, ultimately I would expect them to kind of come roaring back. I think they've been kind of a sleeping giant here, but like, Sorry, I'm getting off topic. Like back to your question is like, I think, what you're gonna see happening in the next few years is like, just as we keep making, everyone's been focusing on do more, prove more, show how capable AI can be. Damn the costs, who cares? We'll just keep spending more money because while we're still innovating and proving out what the frontier can do, cost isn't the most important thing. We're hitting a point where, cost is going to be the most important thing. A lot of the tasks that we're currently doing, a couple predictions, a lot of the tasks we're doing with these large language models, which is an incredibly wasteful way of doing it, right? You can do it with this large language model, but it's kind of like, hitting a fly with a nuclear warhead instead of a fly swatter. Small language models, which is the same exact thing, just smaller, are actually that are fine-tuned for particular purposes, are actually getting to the point where they're exactly as good, in some cases better, at solving a lot of these tasks when you have a focused task. So like, this is one thing Google's incredibly good at. They have models that will run on your Android phone on a CPU, don't even need expensive GPU hardware to run, that for a whole range of common tasks that you would want to have an intelligent assistant on your phone for are provably just as good as like a super expensive LLM on the cloud, but 10,000 times cheaper and faster to run, or probably even more than that. That's a level. We're going to see a lot of innovation in that. We're going to see a lot of innovation in just. I also predict that we're going to crack the code on these large language models running on much more commodity CPU types hardware. Now that we've kind of got the architectures all worked out, so I think we're gonna. I think we're gonna reduce our dependence on the 2 or 3 nano GPUs. I hope that, because that's actually that's a whole geopolitical stability thing, frankly, if we don't get that worked out, because 100% of those GPUs that we depend on for all this AI that's becoming more independent are produced in a single facility on the west coast of Taiwan, which is not the most politically stable place in the world. So there's that risk. Yeah, one more thing, and then I do. Yeah.
Looks like it is.
Yeah. It is.
Does roughing. It has no common sense.
Yeah.
I don't know what the right term is.
Yeah.
That architecture.
I mean, huge philosophical conversation we can have for an hour, but also a couple things. Like, I think it's almost undeniably a piece of the puzzle. I think anything that looks like a really truly reasoning system that would look and act and interact in every way like a real kind of sentient thing that looks like a person when you're talking to it, I think it's a component of that system almost for sure. Like, we've solved a huge range of problems with LLMs, and they're obviously really good at it. And just half tongue in cheek, but half very seriously, when you think about these things, is like, well, all it is just a big statistical pattern matching machine that's looked at a whole bunch of data, figured out the patterns, and regurgitates them back. I'm like, cool. Talk to a neuroscientist and ask him how different that is from what we think you are, because it's not. Like, these things are patterned deliberately after kind of the best that we know about what we think the gray matter in our head works like, and they work like that to a surprising degree. I don't think just LLMs is actually enough to get to kind of a truly reasoning system for some fundamental reasons, but I think it gets shockingly close on a wide range of tasks, and I think a system that uses that as part of it is almost certainly how we get there. And then I'll wrap up. And I'm going to disappoint you a little, Gary. Like, I'll tell the story, but when I first gave this talk, like my very last slide, I had my thank you, and I tried something at that talk, which was really fun. Instead of giving out my contact info, I actually had built a little online AI agent, and you could go hit it. It was agent.bryon.io. It's not going to work if you go there for a reason, but like you could go there and it would basically open up a Google Meet chat, just as Gary said. It would say, hey, thanks for coming to Bryan's talk. If you wanted to follow up, what did you want to talk about? What was your question? What are you interested in? It would just have a conversation very much like, like we just did with my ChatGPT. And basically then it would summarize the conversation, capture the transcript, send it off to me. And then, my promise to everyone in the room was go have a conversation with the agent, and then I'll follow up with you. And if you want to meet, or, that's actually how you followed up with me to set this up. And one thing I was surprised by, I put that up there as kind of every time I give one of these talks, a lot of people are like, let's exchange LinkedIn information, let's exchange email. And I was like, I want to use this as a high pass filter a little bit to say, like, who really wants to follow up for a real reason? So I was like, if you go talk to my agent, give it 5 minutes, give me 5 minutes of your time there, I promise I'll have a real world follow up and we'll meet for coffee and we'll talk. What I found was like, I had 5 times as many people reach out to me through that channel as if I had just put my email up there, which was very interesting. The reason I don't still have it isn't because it wasn't great. It was actually great. The service that I used to build it stopped providing that as a service, and I don't know why. It was a company called Supernormal, which also does like AI like meeting. I think they just decided for product focus to focus in on their core competency. They do like AI meeting assistants that sit in a meeting and take notes. They also had this really, really amazing, I loved it, build this AI agent that I did it with no coding. It was basically click a few buttons and I set it up. And so I am in the process of building that agent again, but coding it up myself now because there's no service out there that does it. So when I have it, I'll send it to you, Gary. You can share it with folks. But yeah, the service I used to build that went away, so I don't have it anymore. But that's the end of my talk. I know we went way over, but y'all asked a ton of great questions. Thank you. This was fun. Hope it was useful.
Anybody wants to take a break?
You're welcome.